So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to learn how to save images from the web correctly and insert them into our web layout here. Now what I've done is I've used Google search engine in order to locate a couple of car dealerships in my area. I decided just for this video lesson just to build a website that reflects a car dealership, and I did find a really neat logo of a car dealership in my area, which is called Scott Evans dealership here in Carrollton, Georgia. And basically, I came across this logo. I thought it was really clever, very well built. And when you're finding things online, you know, when you're using the Google search engine, make sure you're under images. And when you find something you want to use in your website that you're building this thing around, or whatever you're doing, if you're doing your own design, make sure if you are using an image, make sure you click on it after you locate one. It comes up. This is just the thumbnail image. Okay, this is just the representational image. Be sure you click on View Image, which is here, and always go to the original. And you'll see it opens up in a new tab under the browser. And you actually want to right-click on this and save image as, because this is the actual image that you want to download. This is the high quality. So I'm going to go Save Image As. I'm going to go into my root folder that we created. And inside my root folder, notice that this is a PNG file. So I'm just going to rename it. I don't want it to be called Scott Evans DJC LLC. That doesn't make any sense. I'm just going to name it logo. Okay, for this lesson. I'm going to hit save. And you're just going to... And once you have that applied, just go ahead and minimize Dreamweaver. We want to go into the root folder. So real quick, I'm going to go into the root folder. And inside the root folder, notice that the logo is saved. It's right here, okay? And it's a PNG file. The greatest part of a PNG is it counts as a vector. So we didn't see this white text appear before, but because it's a vector file, that white text is there. Anything that this is placed over, any kind of background color, that text is going to show. So if you have it saved as a JPEG, and remember when we brought it in from the web, if this white was there and you save it as a JPEG, that white's going to show up in the JPEG, where if it's a PNG file, it's actually going to wipe out that white and treat it as a vector where the text will be seen. So anyway, what you want to do inside your root folder is you actually want to right-click and go to New and go to New Folder. You want to create a new folder, and you want to name this Images. You want to have an Images folder inside your root folder, because the Images folder is actually where everything inserts from a web server. Every single web server has an Images folder. So if you were to upload and publish your website later, this Images folder would overwrite the Images folder that's on there, which is exactly what you want. And then all your images would link into your HTML page. I'm going to take the logo file, I'm going to click, drag, and drop that into my Images folder. So stick with PNGs and JPEGs specifically. Don't go outside that box for web design needs. You want to stick them inside the Images folder. So back in Dreamweaver, we've already entered down. I'm going to go ahead and just left click and make sure my cursor is activated there right after the header, but before it's ending closing div code. And I'm just going to left click. I'm going to go to Insert. I'm going to go to Image. And this is the easiest way to do this in Dreamweaver without having to use code. I'm going to track it down so we know it's in our root folder. And inside a root folder, you go to Images and you'll see Logo. I'm going to left click and I'm going to double click and bring in the logo. And sure enough, it pops up and it's inside our header, because we placed it where the closing part of the div is at the end of it. Now this is the code you could type in. It's kind of 50-50. It works, it doesn't work. That's why I showed you the insert image option, because it just makes it a lot more user friendly. Now we're in HTML doing this again. You notice that this is not CSS. If we wanted to use CSS to modify this image inside our header now, we would go into the CSS tab. Now the first thing we'd have to do is notice this is going by what's called image source. So that indicates an image, and you can see as I clicked and dragged across it, that little icon appears and understands that that's an image in HTML. What I can do is add an ID to it, just like I add an ID to my div. So if I left click the little cursor before the actual name source and type in ID equals with a apostrophe, I could give this an ID name for CSS, just like we did for the container, the header, and sidebars, and footer. So I'm going to name this logo. And I'm going to do a closing ending quote. I just hit a space bar. So now this image source has an ID. So if I go into CSS and I go And I'm just going to go ahead and click my left cursor at the end of my footer that we created, hit enter down a couple times. All I've got to do is type in that little number slash. And if you remember, back in the source code, we named it logo. So I'm just going to go ahead and in CSS call it logo. I'm going to hit a space bar and start that beginning bracket. And what I want to do is I actually want to add what's called a display block. So if I type in display block, colon, and I do a block, and I do a semicolon, and ending brackets, this fits this image into a block of itself that we can use as a control option for placement across my header. So I'm going to add actually a new a positional value to show you how to kind of position it right or left, or I'll show you the margin value in order to center anything, which is really easy. So what I'll do is just left click and have the cursor flashing after the closing bracket, hit enter, come on down, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add what's called a margin. So let's say we want to center this. So I'm going to do a centering margin, which is called margin auto. So if I type in margin colon auto semicolon, my logo goes perfectly centered across my header. Let's say for some reason, later down the line, your art director, your client said, I really would actually like the logo positioned far to the right, or better yet, sometimes positioned far to the left. What you would do is you could change this, and we could go back to what we learned previously. So if I wanted to make it position right, I could type in position colon absolute, like what we learned when we were building the sidebars. And I could do a semicolon to end that, space, and then I could add what's called your left or your right. Let's say we wanted to position it all the way to the right. So I would type in right, colon, and I would actually type in 0px because that means 0 pixels, ending semicolon, and sure enough, now my logo is on the far right. Same applies if I wanted to position left. I could just take right and change right to left, and voila, it's back completely aligned to the left side. Let's say we wanted to actually give the logo a little bit of space, but let's change the background color to kind of reflect the colors that are going to basically be utilized throughout the website. Notice that the logo is like black with red and white. So what I could do real quick is the header, instead of this blue that we're just using like a default color, I can go ahead and go into the script of the CSS, not the HTML now, but staying in the CSS for the header, and I can just go ahead and click, drag, and select this this hex number that represents that tone of blue, backspace, and go ahead, and I could do one of two things. I could type in, after the colon, I could just type in black, and it will change it to black. If I backspace all the way and wipe out the colon and recreate the colon, hold shift to hit the semicolon key, that color menu can swing open. I can go ahead and left click from the menu. I can select black here. Notice it's number sign all zeros, 6 zeros across. Left click outside that box. There we go. For padding, padding is basically the space between an image and the outside border of any kind of div that is displayed inside of your layout. So if I wanted to add padding to this this logo, remember that the logo itself is the image here, and the image has the ID that we just created. So if I go into CSS and I look at that CSS, the logo, and I come in here with right after the code where we added it to the left, I could just hit the cursor right before the ending bracket, hit space, and I could type in padding. And if I do padding, I could do colon, and I can add a pixel value. So just in this case, I'm just going to do a 5px pixel value. And notice that as soon as you add it and add the semicolon, there's this little bit of space that appears where the logo now has a little bit of breathing room, so your text isn't like right up on the edge of your div. So if I take the padding out, watch what happens real closely. See how that little quote, which is represents the dealership inside the logo, we want your business and we will prove it. If I delete that and go back, look where we start. It starts on the extreme edge. Now if I add the padding back, notice how you have like a little bit of breathe room. So the next step in the process is to add a navigational menu and have buttons across the web page here, right below the logo. So when the viewer enters your web layout, website, you have a range of buttons here to scroll through all the website, hence lead to all the web pages. So if we go to source code, the first thing we need to do is we need to set up after the header div here. I'm going to click the mouse button so the cursor floats to the ending part of the div and hit enter and come on down a couple lines here. It's going to get a few lines here and get some nice space to build this navigational menu. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to create another div. So I'm going to create this div just like we've been doing already. Let's then hit that /. Should go ahead and finish it for you. And then I'm going to just move the cursor between them, hit enter. Let's go down one time and we'll go right on back up. So the div I'm going to build is going to be the navigational div. So it's going to be a box going to appear right below the logo, and we're going to squeeze it between the two sidebars. And I'm going to go ahead and add an ID to this div. So I'm going to click the cursor right after that V in div, hit spacebar, type in ID, and just like we've been learning, I'm going to do equals, and I'm going to do 2 quotes, and I'm going to float that cursor right between the 2 quotes. I'm going to name this ID navigation. Okay. Now inside the navigation div, we're going to build 4 other divs just for this lesson, which will be the buttons, hence the hyperlinks that the viewer will be able to click on. So we're going to click enter. We'll just enter a few spaces down here, get a nice room of space to work with. And the next div I'm going to create, let's go and start it, div. Okay, I'll just go ahead and end it like so. And this div I'm actually going to we'll see, enter down. Let's get the ending part down a line. Let's focus up here, up top. I'm going to add an ID to this div, and this div is going to be ID equals home. Now notice I'm building this div inside the navigation div, so make sure that the ending part of the div, which is this right here, for the navigation part is past the home, okay, and all the other buttons that we're going to be creating as well. So for the home, you can see that's the correct code. That's how it's set up accordingly. And now actually, in order to create this as a button, an actual hyperlink, I have to use this this code. So I'm going to start a new less than symbol. I'm going to click the letter A and do space href, okay. And you can select from the submenu, and then you'll basically type in equals quote quote. I click from the little submenu. You do it that way. I want you gung ho there, and I'm going to actually name this hyperlink index.html. Now the reason why we're doing that is notice that this is going to be the home button, okay, and the home button has to go to the home page, and for website publishing purposes, the index.html is the home page. So make sure you understand that and you don't name your home HTML home.html. You don't want to do that. You want to have it named index. And again, that's why we've been saving the contents of this website as index.html up here in Dreamweaver. All right, so we have that established, and now the home button will go to its page. I'm going to close that, okay, and then here's actually where we name it and how it appears in your web layout. So I'm going to start by naming it home, but I'm going to do a capital letter because you should have a nice capital letter that kind of marks the beginning of the word for button purposes as applies to web design. I'm going to do another less than symbol, and I'm going to do a / and and type in A and do the closing greater than less than. What that did is basically it took all this information and between the height. This is basically all the code for a hyperlink. Anytime you want to put a hyperlink into a web layout, this is the code you would use. In this case, we use it for buttons for navigation. So you could have paragraph text in here somewhere, and we can form it into a hyperlink if we wanted to. And then I'll go ahead and we have our ending closing div. That's exactly what we want. And what I can do is I could type all this all over again, or I could just do a copy-paste series and just go ahead and rename the ID to what we want. So I'm going to basically just click, drag, copy all. Let's just go ahead and enter this up to one line. This will make it easiest for us. And then I'll just click, drag, and select all that area. Go Control-C, Command-C if you're on a Mac. And then I'll have the cursor kind of float at the end. And down, go Control-V, paste it, enter down, Control-V, enter down, Control-V. Now I'm doing 4 buttons for this lesson, okay? And after I did that, notice that they all appeared now in order right up here in the upper left corner of the layout. We're going to modify this further, I promise. But right now we want to go ahead and get our buttons in. This is the best way to do it. I'll have a home button. I'm going to have a About Us button. So if you're building like a portfolio website for an artist website, you'd want to, maybe title this About Me. I'm going to have an inventory button since this is like we're doing a dealership, so inventory. And if you're doing like a portfolio website, you basically want to have this called portfolio or work. And then you always want to have what's called a contact page. So I'm going to name this contact. Now moving forward, we're going to build these pages later. I'll show you how to do it. But right now, they don't exist, but we're going to use the home page to save as your About Us page, and I'll show you how to do that later. But right now, let's go ahead and reach out to it. Let's say we're going to reach out to the About Us.html page, okay? And then that button, we want it to say capital A, About, and you're probably going to want to have a space, capital U, Us. And if you're doing a portfolio website, you could do About Me, okay? But just for this lesson, I'm doing like I said, a dealership here. Inventory, I'll go ahead and name it inventory. So inventory. If you're doing an artist portfolio website, you probably want to make it simple to understand and do portfolio. Okay. Inventory for this lesson. And then, of course, the contact page. So I'm going to rename home as contact. Now, notice the buttons all updated up here at the top left of our web layout, okay, and that's exactly what we want. All right, I'll just go ahead and move this div on back for the navigation, the closing of the navigation, and we'll get all our navigation content together. And we're going to move forward. We're going to start using CSS to build it accordingly. Okay, and so the next step is to use CSS to modify the buttons so they flow across a navigational bar and become clickable buttons to navigate throughout the website. So I'm going to click on the CSS tab, and after logo, let's go ahead and just follow along with what we had back in the source code. So if you remember, the first part is we started with the navigation. Let's go ahead and build the navigation section. So I'm going to start with the number sign. Navigation, if you notice, it already finds it, which is pretty cool. I'll just go gung-ho here. All right, I'm going to start with open bracket. And I'm going to start with position. So just like everything else we've been working on, position is going to be absolute. Okay, semicolon in that. Space. I also want to work on what's called the background color. So I'm going to do background color, like what we've been learning. Background hyphen color, colon. So hold shift, hit the semicolon key. Create a colon. From the color menu, you can select the color that you want. For my lesson, I'm just going to basically do black. I'm going to just carry over the black from the header. So I'm going to actually, instead of even doing a hex variable, I'm just going to type in black, and it's going to be black. I'm going to do semicolon in that, space, and we got to focus on width. So I type in width because we got to have a width for the navigational bar. So again, colon, and width, we're going to basically bring over the same width as the header. So if you remember, the header is 100% width. Same applies to navigation. It's got to be the same length as the header and the entire web layout. So 100%, semicolon. In that, we've got to do a top variable. So I got to type in top, colon, and we're going to do the same as the left and right sidebars. Now, those are 150 pixels. So this means it's going to drop 150 pixels and start right underneath the logo, which is exactly what we want. So 150 px. Okay. If the if the sidebars are kind of covering up a little bit, don't worry. We're going to fix that here shortly. We're just using the whole layout right now to modify it and build what we want. And then we got 150 px, so semicolon space, and then we got to establish the height. So height colon, the height's going to be, well, what I've always used is 50 pixels. So do 50. Remember, you can always modify all these after you build the whole lesson out here. We're going to do 50 pixels, semicolon, and closing bracket. Okay? And there's our navigational bar setup. So I'm going to hit enter. Come on down. Now, if you remember, we had IDs, if I go back under source code, for all the buttons, the home, the about us, inventory, and contact. So back in CSS, and if you notice back in the source code, they all dropped in order based on the navigational button. So they're all inside the navigational button, okay? They're fitting in there, but now we've got to modify our buttons so they flow across the navigational bar. So back to CSS, I'm going to start with the number sign, and I'm going to type in home because that's the ID that we established back in source code for home, about us, and inventory and contact. And back to CSS, so I'm going to basically hit spacebar, start an opening bracket. And the home, what we want to start with is what we're going to do is we're going to float it. So I'm going to do a float, colon, and I'm going to float it left. Now when I do this, okay, it's going to allow all the buttons to understand that they're going to float left of each other. So they're going to float right across, and they're going to float right because they're floating based on the left, how they're positioned left. So that's exactly what I want. I'm also going to add a padding. So I'm going to do a padding, colon. I'm going to do a padding of 20 pixels. Now you can mess with padding, end it with a semicolon, close the bracket. By doing this, okay, it automatically creates a nice rectangular box for the button to fit in based off the padding. And you'll see what I'm talking about. Hit enter. Now what I can do is I can go ahead and just click and drag and copy all this code, go Control C, Command C if you're on a Mac. I'm going to left click on the very outside, hit enter, go Control V, enter, Control V, enter, Control V, and I'm going to name home, if you remember and recall, that's the about us. Okay, and I'm going to name the next one down, I'm going to call it inventory. Make sure it all matches the IDs we established earlier. And then this one, I believe, was contact. Now, once I do that, notice how the buttons are shot over to the right side of each other. So back in source code, yep, those were my IDs. There they are right there. That represent those divs. And now, if you're noticing, the sidebars are covering up the navigational controls. So back in CSS, we can fix that very easily. All you got to do is the sidebar left, sidebar right. It's not going to be 150 pixels as it aligns with the navigation control. We can just make these 200 px because if you think about it, the height's 50, so we're just adding 50 more. So we're going to do 200, and it should drop for the left sidebar and right sidebar. Do 200, and it should drop right underneath the navigational bar, and that's exactly what we want. Now something else we can do is we can change the color because these are hyperlinks. We're using the hyperlinks as button navigation for the website. I'm going to do one more line here. I'll do a space between it. And the way we change the color for the navigation was just the letter A in CSS. So type A, hit the space bar, open a bracket, type in color, colon, and for the color menu, you can select what you want. I'm going to just go ahead and type in white. And once I do that, you'll see it turn white, end it with a semicolon, close the bracket, and voila, we've got our whole navigational menu constructed just through HTML and CSS. What we want to start with is what we're going to do is we're going to float it. So I'm going to do a float, colon, and I'm going to float it left. Now when I do this, okay, it's going to allow all the buttons to understand that they're going to float left of each other. So they're going to float right across, and they're going to float right because they're floating based on the left, how they're positioned left. So that's exactly what I want. I'm also going to add a padding. So I'm going to do a padding, colon. I'm going to do a padding of 20 pixels. Now you can mess with padding, end it with a semicolon, close the bracket. By doing this, okay, it automatically creates a nice rectangular box for the button to fit in based off the padding. And you'll see what I'm talking about. Hit enter. Now what I can do is I can go ahead and just click and drag and copy all this code, go Control C, Command C if you're on a Mac. I'm going to left click on the very outside, hit enter, go Control V, enter, Control V, enter, Control V, and I'm going to name home, if you remember and recall, that's the about us. Okay, and I'm going to name the next one down, I'm going to call it inventory. Make sure it all matches the IDs we established earlier. And then this one, I believe, was contact. Now, once I do that, notice how the buttons have flown over to, or shot over to the right side of each other. So back in source code, yep, those were my IDs. There they are right there. That represent those divs. And now, if you're noticing, the sidebars are covering up the navigational controls. So back in CSS, we can fix that very easily. All you got to do is the sidebar left, sidebar right. It's not going to be 150 pixels as it aligns with the navigation control. We can just make these 200 px because if you think about it, the height's 50, so we're just adding 50 more. So we're going to do 200, and it should drop for the left sidebar and right sidebar. Do 200, and it should drop right underneath the navigational bar, and that's exactly what we want. Now, something else we can do is we can change the color because these are hyperlinks. We're using the hyperlinks as button navigation for the website. I'm going to do one more line here. I'll do a space between it. And the way we change the color for the navigation was just the letter A in CSS. So type A, hit the space bar, open a bracket, type in color, colon, and for the color menu, you can select what you want. I'm going to just go ahead and type in white. And once I do that, you'll see it turn white, end it with a semicolon, close the bracket, and voila, we've got our whole navigational menu constructed just through HTML and CSS. Okay, so moving on, every website has to have body text. You really you don't have a website unless you have supporting body text that allows your viewer to read information, scroll through content, and understand exactly how the written information connects to the whole visual theme. So in source code, what we're going to do is we're actually going to start by building another div. So in order to build body content, where this body content will be paragraph text that appears within this area between the two sidebars, we've got to create another div. And we're going to create this div, and it's going to land, and it's going to come between both the left and right sidebar, of course. So I'm going to click the left cursor right after left sidebar. Let's just go and bring this on up a little bit, clean it up to have so much space between each div. And I'm just going to left click and then hit enter. Down, I'm going to start a new div. So I'm going to go less than and type in div. I'm going to close that div, and let's just go ahead and finish it. So less than, hit the /. It should go ahead and fill in the rest. And I'm just going to enter that second part down, and I'm going to go right up back up the top, and after that V, the first part of the div, I'm going to hit the space bar, type in ID. We want to give it an ID, so equals quote. We're going to name this middle. Okay, I'm going to end a quote for it. And then inside this middle div, which is going to be coming, which is going to appear between both sidebars, I'm going to add what's called paragraph text. Now, paragraph text, there's a lot of different variations of text you can have based on typeface and fonts, but the paragraph text is the most commonly used for narration text and descriptive text across all the web pages of a website. So we're going to do paragraph. The way you establish paragraph text is you start with less than, type in a P, and then you close it. And then you can basically start it again, hit the /, and it goes ahead and finishes it for you. And this is going to be paragraph text. Now what you want to do is any text you want to type in, you want to type it in between these two markers, which stands for the paragraph text. So if I was to have my home page, I would probably say, welcome to Scott Evans' website. And then, you could put in there, we have a lot of inventory to choose from for your needs and so forth and so forth. Whatever the description needs to be, and that's why you have copywriters in the industry. You know, the artist doesn't have to do everything. So what I'm going to do is basically just fill in some random text here. I'll just go ahead and then I'll just do let's just do that one line, because this is just a lesson example of how to use HTML to build a website. Let's just do that twice so you get the point, okay? And we'll do that as a paragraph text. Now nothing's showing up yet, and that's because, again, we have to use CSS to modify it. And what I'm going to do is, now that we have our middle section built and we have paragraph text inside our div that's going to appear like this, we're going to CSS. And because I added an ID and we named it middle, we're going to add a middle number for CSS. So I'm going to, at the end of my navigational white, I'm going to hit enter. And I'm going to start with a number sign, middle, spacebar, open bracket. And for the middle body text, you have to do this for responsive web design. You have to establish a padding, and then we're going to do a hyphen, and it's going to be called padding left. And padding left for this web page website they're working on with the colon, type in your colon, is going to be 180 pixels. And I'm going to add a semicolon to finish it, space bar, and then we're also going to do a padding hyphen right, and colon, 180 pixels, semicolon. And what that's going to do is, now Dreamweaver understands that the paragraph text inside this middle div, it's going to be 180 pixels from the left and the right, and it's going to allow it to align and transform based on the crunching of the web page. It's going to be pretty awesome. And then we also got to have padding hyphen top, colon. And if you can recall, for what we learned before, the new centering of the left and right sidebars was 200 pixels. So our top, again, it has to line up with those sidebars, is going to be 200 pixels. And I'm going to add a semicolon and a closing bracket. And as soon as you do that, you're going to notice that your paragraph text has appeared. If I left click on it inside my layout, notice that there is the div, and it's 180 from the left and the right. I'm going to go ahead and file save Dreamweaver, save the index page. And then I'm immediately going to, after saving this, I'm going to go ahead and go to File, Preview in Browser. I'm going to preview in my favorite browser, Google Chrome. And if we take a look here, if I click and drag, notice how the text transforms to the responsive web layout. It transforms, crunches down. So no matter if it's on a mobile device, tablet, whatever that might be, your text is allowed to modify to those constraints. Pretty nice.